finding windows for a custom Snowcat, I want something that's easily replaceable and something that is easily sourced and cheap. So that's three things you got to check off the box when you're trying to find something, when you're building something custom, because you don't want to one-off and have to go to a glass place and have them cut you a specific window if you break, because inevitably you're going to be going through trees, brush, whatever happens. And so I had this great idea, school buses, so flat nose school buses. So I was able to pull like a Thomas flat nose school bus, and the windows ended up being exactly what I needed. I had a steel place press me some trim to make this work, because it needed a 1/4 inch relief in it so that this sits pretty much flush when it's mounted in there, and it gives that a good mounting surface to go to. So obviously, if you've got school bus windows, next thing you're going to need is wipers. And so if you get the school bus windows, you should probably get school bus wipers, right? So that was a whole different challenge, because I don't have the budget to go get new. So, but there's school buses everywhere all over the place. But the problem I ran into is the ones I seen alongside the road that I'd stop and talk to people on, they were going to make a camper or a deer shack or, off-grid camp situation out of that. So finding a school bus, flat nose, because the newer style, that somebody wanted to part with their wipers on was a little more challenging than it should have been. So I ended up doing some digging around and a few phone calls and some good help from my cousin. And we found a set of, off of flat nose, 4 screws that come right out. And these are air powered. So I thought, great, air powered's okay, because I have a compressor on the Snowcat. And test them all out, got them home here, got them in the shop, tested out, they worked awesome. So on my bench test situation, I'm using our big air compressor with an 80-gallon tank on it, and they run flawless. So then I go into my Snowcat, and I got thinking, 2 downfalls with air wipers that everybody knew about, and you go real old school and you get vacuum wipers, moisture and leaks. So moisture on a Snowcat, pretty detrimental. And leaks, not so much, because I'm going to use compression fittings. Do not use in an air system where it gets cold. Do not use the snap-in air connectors. They will leak. So we're going to run this. We've got one thing to contend with is moisture. The other contend with is these compressors are great, but unless you're going to get a really expensive one, the duty cycle on them is extremely low. This one has a 30% duty cycle, which is a lot better than what most have. But I needed to check it out with the wipers. So I hooked it all up to this system, kicked it on, and 7 seconds before my compressor kicked on and needed air. So if I was going to run the wiper, that was 1 wiper. So if you run 2 wipers, 3.5 seconds, kicks on, needs air, it's going to be out of air in no time flat. And that'd be fine until your compressor hits its duty cycle, thermal overloads, shuts down until it cools off. You'd be out of wipers. So back to the junkyard and look for more wipers, electric and flat nose, and the right era for this size windows. Proved way more challenging than it should have, but we were able to locate 2 electric wipers, plus the windshield squirter kit, and all the switches, and all that. So I do need to get the wipers off the panel, because the guy wants his panel back because he's using it for storage. And on the front of that bus, without them panels on there, it's wide open into the bus itself. So now, as a kid, I know why school buses were so dang cold in the wintertime. So here's the front clip that the wipers and turn signal were attached to. Since it was darn cold out, we decided to just pull the panel off, take this in the shop and do this from in here, because we were having trouble with that jam nut that's on there, getting that loose. So if all else fails, we just take the torch to it and we'll get plenty of heat that way. So some of you may be wondering what this is. This is what we're working on in the daytime. This is our cattle loading chute. So we'll have a semi loadout on one side and a stock trailer loadout on the other side. So that's why I can't work 24/7 on the Snowcat like I hoped. I went ahead and sped this up 2 times here. I wish I could have sped it up a lot faster, but I'm using iMovie and the iPad editing app. So if anybody's got any tricks of the trade on how to speed some of this working footage up, I edited out a ton of stuff, tried to cut it down as much as possible, but I wanted to give you guys the content of how I went through the process and the steps to do it. So hopefully you like this. Let me know in the comments below, and go ahead and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so when I drop these videos, you guys are the first to see them. Sure appreciate everything you do. I will also leave a link in the description for that V-Air air compressor that is working awesome for me. So again, thanks a lot. Enjoy the ride, and we'll see you on the snow. So this is exactly what we didn't want to happen. This jam that is seized on here. We're gonna, all else fails, don't have a small enough bearing puller. So we just actually need to heat that and get that warmed up. And then once that gets glowing, it'll just pop right off of there. So we'll grab the torch.
We don't need a very big flame since it's just a little piece, so we need to tone this down so we don't cook everything else around it.
Hopefully you can see that, it's glowing cherry hot. Once we do that, should come right off, we hope. There it is. A little bit of heat goes a long ways. A little bit is the key word. Now let this cool. We don't want to quench it. Now, gosh, terrible at this. Now we can carefully start taking the rest of it apart. Because remember, it's going to be hot now. And there we have it. We have our wiper motor off, ready to go. Next, we'll want to take our squirter passer off so we can reuse that.
And that washer is shot.
Back at the Snowcat, so we need to get our wipers on, so we need to make sure we get those in the right location. So we had our measurements off of the school bus, but the windows on the school bus were turned in portrait mode versus landscape. So, so opposite. Ours are portrait mode. Those ones are landscape. So we might have to do a little bit of adjusting on the arms on the wipers. One of the stranger things was the passenger motor was mounted upside down versus driver motor, which is mounted in that orientation there. So I did mark that. And so I needed a test bed to see if the motor spun counterclockwise or opposite locations. So I hooked this all up. I figured out which wires. There's only 2 wires coming off the switch here that were both red, and then doubled up wires I obviously figured were grounds. And then we had a brown set which went to purple, which purple, if you trace everything through, the only purple wire comes out for the squirter motor. And then the other set of wires here, the black wires come out, they go to a brown wire, which Thomas is great. They label all their wires just like military. And they come out, so I was able to follow this other cord up here, which had 3 wires in it for some reason, and trace that wire to here, tested it out on the meter. That is our ground, so we tied that. But then, of course, those motors ground through the frame, which grounds through the unit. So I had to do jumper wires from each motor to make it work. So they have the delay on them, so it's going to be great. So they just go off, and then you have low, medium, or low and high. So, and then one really cool thing is it has the return to park function on it. So it'll always go back to the same spot. So it'll be just like factory, and then we'll hook the squirter motor up, so you just give them a push, and then that sends fluid to that motor, and then that'll do a couple wipes. Same way they'll still do a couple wipes. So everything works great. It's always fun when you're junkyard diving and stuff works like it's supposed to. So the thing I wanted to do is get those both the same. Otherwise, on the Snowcat, this here is tight enough where one would be a couple inches higher and the other one would be a couple inches lower. So by being able to have those both mounted, what I'm going to say is up, we're going to be able to keep those at the same height so they look even. So that was my main test, was to make sure that the one motor didn't spin counterclockwise, in which if it did, we were going to have to figure out how we could reverse that so those would still be even, because that 2-inch difference on the front of the Snowcat would just look a little strange. So we'll get at it. All right, we're back at it. We had to make a quick run to town. Windshield brackets, as we're working on that, was missing these little screws which hold the wiper arm rocker from going back and forth. So that's obviously something we need to have on these. I don't know how it was working before. It was just sandwiched in between the outer bracket and the inner bracket, just with that nut and crush washer. So that undo would create a lot of friction in between that arm and that. So hopefully that doesn't prematurely burn the window out. But if anybody needs to know, these are an M5 by 0.08. So it's a really strange size, but as Fastenal always does, they had them on hand in stock. So thanks again for Fastenal for keeping a good inventory nowadays. So we're gonna go ahead and put the drivers back together. We're gonna have to change it a little bit, because if you remember, on the bus originally, the passenger one was upside down and the driver's side was right side up. But on our Snowcat, we only have a matter of 4 inches to work with. So we can't have them flipped, because they would be basically 2 inches difference, and it would look extremely goofy on the front of the Snowcat to have the wipers off. Everybody would give me so much crap, be like, how many beers did you have before you drilled them holes in there? And we're not going to answer that question, but we're going to keep them level and even. So therefore, we're going to have to flip the park lock on the driver's side wiper. The passenger one actually went in the right way. The driver's side one is the one we're going to flip. So it didn't hurt having to take this apart to get this little screw, because we got to flip it anyway. So We'll put that back together and then we'll get mounted on the cat. So as you can see, once the wiper motor goes on here, you can't get at these screws that hold the bushing arm here. And then they have to be zero clearance, because as you can see, this has got to go back and forth. So it's kind of a specific size, and we got to make sure that that's right. They were at least nice enough to put a little cutout here, so we can get a socket in fairly easy, at least to tighten it up. Now this motor here had the park lock, this motor here had the park lock set in this orientation so that it would lock back. But since we're flipping it over, we need to change that 180 degrees to have that park lock stay in the center of the window. So we're gonna go ahead and put that on, and we're gonna get it as close to 180 degrees as we can to match the other wiper. So we're gonna go ahead and get that nut started on there. It's a little more challenging now that we have that in there, and you'll have to use a wrench in order to tighten that now. So, and I just noticed this washer does have serrations on it, or washer, the nut has serrations on it, so you got to be sure that you get it so the serrations are against the face of the linkage arm there. We need to get that sitting at 90 degrees. I'm just gonna snug it in there because as we get that completely set, I wanna set that in place so that we have a good, perfect spot on it on the windscreen. So, windscreen. I must be in Australia. Windshield. All right, now to move on to the Snowcat. Okay, as you can see, we already have our passenger side mounted. It's in place, been test fitted for movement. Everything works as it should. That was the easy one because that one we kept in the same orientation. The driver's side one's gonna be a little more challenging because on the bus, it was in this orientation. For our mounting purposes, we had to flip it like this. So we had to change the stop location, and then also we might have to modify the arm by shortening that a little bit because there might be a change in the sweep. So we'll just have to get it mounted, test fit it, and see how it goes. So let's do that. All right, now it's kind of in place, just kind of temporary, everything's just loosely snugged up. We're going to test fit it for movement, make sure it has the right amount of movement, and that I didn't invert the park lock and it go this way versus the other way, because remember we did have to invert that motor bracket and the motor itself. So if it does spin the opposite direction, we're going to have to invert the wires, so instead of counterclockwise rotation, a clockwise rotation. But we tested it out before on the bench, and it should be spinning the right direction in order to make this work once we rotated the park stop. All right, passenger side here. Looks like that works. A little bit of a hitch in there because the swing arm is hitting that bottom rail. We're gonna have to trim that out a little bit. This one here, I believe what we got going on is it's going around the other direction. So we're gonna have to invert those wires so the motor spins the correct way. All right, so this is a classic case of we outsmarted ourselves. We flipped it 90 degrees, but when we rotated the motor, well, excuse me, we flipped the park lock 180 degrees. We rotated the motor 180 degrees. So therefore, we could have left that where it was. So let's go ahead and move that back, and then that'll be perfect. So again, we have that hitting on the bottom there, but for testing purposes, think I might bring it back just a touch so the arch is a little more even. But it does look like we're gonna get a good clean wipe on it. So that is awesome. Awesome. So you can get things at the junkyard and make them turn out really good. Just takes a little bit of time and effort. So again, thanks for watching.